Welcome, UF100 history fans, to the last narrated PowerPoint. So this is going to be the last time that I'll be pushing out content that we'll be asking you to take a look at. So what I wanted to focus on with this last PowerPoint is what I've alluded to earlier, but now I want to drill down a bit more, and this is the final core identity project. So as we take a look back now at our, altered timeline vis-a-vis the coronavirus. But if you recall, before any of this hit us, when we started way back at the end of August in our course, The History of Identity, from Given to Chosen, what I tried to signal there was we were going to make an effort to try to begin to explore some of the ways that historians do what they do. And what historians do, it goes well beyond just memorizing the names and dates, etc. What I tried to state at the time, if history really were just that, then you could just buy some flashcards, laminated sheets of some kind, and call it good. You never would have to take a history class. You wouldn't have to really ever explore how to do history. You would just memorize it. But what we've tried to demonstrate is that history, in a sense, is like Velcro. If you recall that earlier analogy that a good many of you wrote about in one of our exams. So here we wanted to finish taking a look at the doing of history and how that relates to this final core identity project. Okay, so again, as I'm recording this, about half of the folks in each of the discussion groups, I think, wrapped up their solo teaching on their identity variable. And we'll be pushing out the options for exam number 2 here shortly on Blackboard. And then the last time in discussion group that you'll get together, you'll do as a team now, you'll be team teaching the Boise Ethnic Streetscape. So what this narrated PowerPoint, though, will be about is the core identity project and the 2 elements. It consists of you submitting on May 5, that's a Tuesday at noon, 2 elements, paper, a Microsoft Word document, as well as a YouTube video link. All right, so with that in mind, we're going to be, what you're being asked to do is develop an essay, and we'll be taking a look again at some of the specifics of what's required for that paper here. But then in addition to that paper where you'll develop your content, we're also asking you to now, since one of our learning objectives in the course was oral communication, to summarize some of the main points of your research paper on this YouTube video link. All right, so in terms of the video, in this case, we're asking for less is more. It's a 2 to 3 minute summary of the main points of your research paper. You're encouraged to speak. Don't fall into the trap. And the viewer can tell if you're reading. See, because when the camera can pick up your eyes. So make an effort to the extent possible to try to speak to an audience instead of just from beginning to start reading from a script. Now, if you need notes, that's not a problem. What's recommended is use bullet points so you don't tempt yourself to fall into reading whole sentences. And then when you finish that video, upload it to your YouTube channel, and you'll just post the link there in Blackboard. And again, and this is all taken from the directions, if you click on that link on our Blackboard page, and that there you'll find the active link for the upload directions if you need again. Now to the paper format. So if it works better for you, just use the title, Make a Life Core Identity Project. Unless you want to get creative, that's fine too. Develop what you wish. But if you don't want to spend time kind of coming up with something distinctive, you can just use that title. There's no bonus points for original titles. Your paper is required to be between 4 to 5 pages. Okay, and that's with double-spaced, regular margins for your Microsoft Word document. And in your paper, include at least 5 footnotes where you quote or draw ideas directly from the chapters in Nash and Murray. Again, you'll find this all if you click on the link there for the directions to the assignment, including the Chicago-style citation. So all you need to do, as you can see here in red at the very end, you just put in the page or pages that you are using for the idea that you're citing. Okay, so for visual learners, for the purposes of the paper that you will then make a video of with some of the highlights, you're now offered essentially 2 paths in Nash and Murray's book, Helping College Students Find Purpose. Then of those 2, what you're asked to do now is to make a reasoned choice and to make the case that now one chapter is superior to the other. Or as you can see in this graphic, you'll be taking the position now that one of these represents your greater truth versus the second chapter, which is a lesser truth. So that's what I want to spend some time here in this narrated PowerPoint touching on, because this is jargon, reference to greater versus lesser truth. So I do want to hopefully provide some clarity as to what's being referenced here, because it's one of the key elements as we've been trying to underscore for argumentative persuasive essay. Again, there are many different kinds of essays. So the one that we're asking you to develop is what's known as an argumentative, or sometimes you'll see it referenced as a persuasive essay. There are many different ways to conceptualize this. For our purposes, I just settled upon 6 parts of the argumentative essay. And there you see in front of you what those 6 are. And now what I've included is this reference to greater as well as lesser truth. So key point to note, when you get to the con, or where you're addressing arguments that counter the position that you're taking, as we'll see, you don't have to argue that the other side is completely mistaken, that they're out to lunch, that they're liars, that they don't know what they're talking about. You can take the high road and say, well, the second chapter is lesser truth, but the chapter that you have selected provides the greater truth. All right, so that's what we want to take a look at now, this contrast between greater and lesser truth. So this will serve as our working definition as we go forward. And it's one of the key elements of what it is we do as historians. What we're seeking to do is to differentiate between greater and lesser truth. So greater truth we can define as being based on the preponderance of the evidence and logical reasoning. Okay? Both chapters, and we'll look at some of the points that the authors provide us. No doubt, both chapters make good, well-reasoned arguments. But in the argumentative persuasive essay, you have to get off the fence. You can't just say, yes, they're both correct. See, because then you just took the easy way out. Yes, everyone agrees. Both chapters can provide some useful information. But in the argumentative persuasive essay, you got to get off the fence at least 51-49. Or 60-40, 70-30, however in the end that you decide. But the whole point and why it's called an argumentative essay is you're tipping one way versus the other. So in the graphic that we see here, you see the continuum from 0% all the way to 100%. One of the advantages of now using this analytical framework of greater versus lesser truth is that we don't get caught in this false dichotomy. Many times in history, we are not provided with 0% and then 100% truth. In almost all instances, not just in history, but frankly in life, we're on this continuum somewhere. So that's why we need to discern and be able to identify for ourselves how we can more times than not approximate the greater versus the lesser truth. So this will serve as our 29.0 history journal. Okay. Note, the numbering system is no longer being used for exams because this is now post-exam, this content. But continue with the format that we were using. I decided just to maintain this as we go further. So we're going to be looking now closer, once again, at what we've touched on earlier with complex truth, because that's what presents a good many times significant challenges for historians. So we'll look at complex truth and see how now understanding it in terms of greater versus lesser truth. So visual learners, this graphic is for you. All right, so the takeaway is all these other smaller slices, colors, can possess elements of truth. They're not outright lies, fabrications, as we saw in the working definition. Okay, but as a matter of logic, there can only be one greater truth. There can be multiple lesser truths, but only one greater truth. And that's what you are seeking to articulate in this core identity project paper. All right, so what we're going to be building upon is actually one of the points that Nash and Murray touch on. They too make this observation. How is it exactly that we can discern why one truth ends up being greater than another? They referenced it, Nash and Murray, in their chapter. How is it that one truth can have more value than another? So that'll serve as our organizing or research question as we move forward in illustrating greater versus lesser truth. So again, as a brief refresher, we did touch on the ultimate goal for historian being the pursuit of truth. All right, so having identified that, then we have the further challenge. There's not just one truth. So earlier we had touched on this in one of our journal prompts. Normative truth is when the group decides what is considered true. Objective is true outside of you. Subjective is what we can reference as your truth. What we're looking at, though, is now complex truth. So what you have in complex truth is what we had in that earlier graphic. You have many lesser truths. There's more than just one position with truth in it. Then the challenge becomes to discern greater versus lesser truth. And that's what it means to do history. So we're trying to put you, therefore, in the driver's seat. We're trying, therefore, to make you the historian. You have these two choices, two conflicting truth claims, and we're asking you now, if you will, to make the case why one truth, in this case one chapter, you find preferable to the other. Okay. So again, what you're going to be seeking to articulate is greater truth. So with that in mind, it's always beneficial to provide examples. So do keep this in mind. You're always writing in this course for someone outside of this class. And a good way, therefore, to communicate, to give people an understanding of what you're talking about is to provide examples. All right, so here's an attempt to practice what I preach. Here's one example that we can use now to hopefully begin to illustrate greater versus lesser truth. This is referenced as the parable of the blind man and the elephant. So in the opening, it was 6 men of Indostan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. All right, so we have our scenario. We have essentially, literally 6 blind men who went to go see the elephant. Okay, so the first blind man, you can read the whole phrase if you wish, but the first blind man, because he grabs onto the side of the elephant, concludes that the truth is the elephant is like a wall. But since the second one grabbed the tusk instead, the second one doesn't know what the first one's talking about, because the second one knows that the elephant, the truth is it's like a spear. The third, because he grabbed the trunk, believes the truth is the elephant is like a snake. The fourth, because he grabbed the knee, knows the truth about the elephant is it's very like a tree. The fifth grabs the ear to know that the elephant is very like a fan. And then you get to the sixth, and the sixth wouldn't know what the other 5 are talking about, because since he grabbed onto the tail, he knows that the elephant is very like a rope. And so these men of Indostan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion, exceeding stiff and strong. Though each was partly in the right, they were all in the wrong. All right, so this version of the parable of the six blind men was a variation as developed by John Godfrey Sachs. Okay, but what we want to look to now is the moral of the story, how this story relates to try to explain greater versus lesser truth. All right, so for our purposes, we can acknowledge that yes, in a way, all six of the blind men had at least lesser truth. The elephant is like a tree. Yes, the elephant can be said to be like a rope. But we're not blind. And we know that the elephant is not a fan. And the elephant is not a snake. The elephant is not a rope. So, though all six had the lesser truth, they don't have the greater truth. Second example now. To illustrate greater versus lesser truth, we can use seatbelts. So the issue is, wearing seatbelts saves lives. Greater or lesser truth? Now, wearing seatbelts saves lives. If you argue that this is the greater truth, no doubt someone can quickly interject, well, that's not true, because there's no doubt that you'll encounter some folks who know of someone personally or have heard in a reliable news story that somebody died because they had their seatbelt on. But that's just the point. Greater versus lesser truth is based on the preponderance of the evidence. And the preponderance of the evidence is, yes, more times than not, when people wear seatbelts, they end up surviving car accidents. That's the greater truth. The lesser truth is, in a handful of instances, people die because they had their seatbelts on. So that can serve as a second example. A third and final example, because I didn't want this to just be pedestrian, some sort of abstract point. This is a very real challenge that we encounter, well, on a daily basis. As you can see here in this graphic, this is a protest some time ago in Iran. So here you can see some folks went out of their way to develop a pretty fancy poster wherein they assert that the Holocaust is a big lie. See, this is where greater versus lesser truth, it's imperative that we become proficient in being able to tell the difference between greater and lesser truth. Holocaust deniers, and you can go online and you can see their websites. There's a whole subculture of this minority of folks who continue to perpetuate this notion that the Holocaust was a big lie, that it never really happened. Now, if you take even just a cursory look, you'll see that they're not just asserting this. They'll always try to kind of point to some evidence, some minor example. So akin to the seatbelt example. So, for example, what I'm referencing, there have been some Holocaust survivors who have maintained that the concentration camp that they were in, some of the folks there were killed, and then their corpses were used to create soap. All right, so we know that this was done in some instances during the course of the Nazi Holocaust. But what Holocaust deniers do is they've been able to find a few folks who, it is true, mistakenly asserted this. See, it didn't happen in their camp. See, afterwards, they had heard of this, and part of their memory now essentially kind of crafted onto this. So technically, yes, it is true that there have been a handful of folks on video or have been recorded as saying that they were at a concentration camp where this happened. Later research has demonstrated, well, that didn't happen in their particular camp. Okay, it happened in camp X, Y, and Z, but not in yours. But here's the clever twist of the Holocaust deniers. See, they take that lesser truth and go, ha ha, hence, this lesser truth is now the greater truth. These people, they're all lying. That's not the case. So we can ascertain that the Holocaust did happen because of the preponderance of the evidence. What's the evidence? Approximately 6 million Jews are gone after World War II. Where'd they go? Where did 6 million people go then? Okay, so in 1939, all countries are counting their citizens, if for no other reason to get them to pay taxes. So we know going into World War II approximately what our populations are in these Western European countries. All right, so we know then by 1945 we're down at least 6 million Jews. Then where do they go? The preponderance of the evidence. There is a greater truth that the Holocaust did happen. So that's why this is just one of numerous examples where it's not just this academic exercise. It's imperative that historians be able to discern the difference between greater and lesser truth. Okay? That has to remain, therefore, our ultimate goal. Why we do what we do. We're hoping, therefore, to ascertain truth. And whether we are focusing in this particular case to ascertain the normative truth, what a specific group is determined to be true, what is the objective, subjective, or complex truth, it's imperative, therefore, we can discern greater versus lesser truth. All right, so what I've tried to establish here with our working definition is what we're going to use as our criteria to differentiate between greater and lesser truth. The preponderance of the evidence and logical reasoning. So this is what we're asking you now to incorporate in this final research paper. Okay. Now, in terms of research, no outside research is required. The only two pieces of evidence, the only two sources you're being asked now to work through are these two chapters that are provided you in PDF form by Nash and from Nash and Murray's book. Okay, so that's all the outside. No outside research is necessary. If you want to bring in a few outside points, that's fine. Okay, but that cannot be the majority of your argument because you will be primarily assessed on the evidence in those two chapters. All right, so keep that in mind as you're developing, if you will, your greater versus lesser truth argument. Okay, so again, you've got two chapters as pushed forward by Nash and Murray. Okay, and what you have to now establish is why one chapter will represent your greater truth, and using reasoning and evidence, differentiate your chosen chapter over the lesser truth of the other chapter. Okay. So here we are now in our next History Journal entry, 29.1, articulating a starting point. Now, again, we're still discussing this final core identity project. So what I wanted to acknowledge in this particular part, that your meaning and purpose is not going to remain static in your life. It's very rare that, in fact, well, I don't think it's even possible. But I will acknowledge it's, okay, maybe it's 0.01% possible that somebody's meaning and purpose is going to remain the same as far as they can remember from age 5 until they die at age 95. I guess it's possible, but it's just not really probable for human beings. So the only thing we're really asking you to do is to articulate a starting point. What do you take from these two chapters? Okay, so it's a very limited exercise. It's a limited exercise because we're just trying to make sure to work through the format of the argumentative essay. So this is not intended to be definitive. Just take a position. We just need to be able to assess that you can work through reasoning and evidence to take a position in an argument. So articulating a starting point based on these two chapters. Okay, and for us, we'll just use May 5 of 2020 at this moment in time with these two chapter options. Okay, which chapter do you think provides the best path to providing meaning and purpose? That's all we're asking at this moment in time. Okay, so what we're asking you, therefore, to develop is going to follow what Nash and Murray develop in their discussion. Okay, we're following this whole notion, as you can see there in highlighted red. We're asking you to articulate a starting point. Okay, as they go on to say, of aspects of life that seem either enigmatic or ultimately unknowable. See, because at the top, all our students, they noted, need some sense of personal identity. So that's why we're using now Nash and Murray. It ties into our course theme of identity, and we want to develop this ability to articulate a starting point in an argumentative essay. All right, so you got two choices. Here's option number one. Pretty straightforward. If you wish, okay, just use this thesis statement if you're going to go with this chapter 2 as your greater truth. Okay, so you just have to fill this in. Okay, existentialism and postmodernism is a better path to meaning and purpose than religion and spirituality because, and you'll fill in the blank. Okay, so that's one option. And your second option now is to use chapter 3 instead. And again, if this is your selection, just use this as your thesis statement. Because there you have it, straightforward. The reader will have clarity, okay, is the position that you're taking, and then the rest of your paper is going to elaborate on what is being referenced in terms of religion and spirituality as having the edge over existentialism and postmodernism. Okay, so those are your two options. So hopefully it's pretty straightforward. Okay, you got two choices. We're asking you, for the sake of this exercise, to choose a position. Okay. Those of you who came in and when we had our one-on-one, when we were consulting about this, okay, you might recognize this from that consult. Okay. The reason that we're doing this paper as well as the video I've touched on earlier, okay, we write ourselves to clarity. All right, so we have a written component to clarify our thinking on these positions that are being offered. But then, because our learning objective is oral communication, we're also asking you, after you finish your paper, to provide a brief summary in a video highlight. Okay? And then last but not least, why this particular topic? Okay? At that time, I noted it's humanity's unique question. Okay? All right, so if you are recognizing this cartoon there on the right, okay, we believe that what makes humans unique, okay, we share a lot of elements in common with other species on this planet. All right, so we're not the only species that bleeds, for example. We are not the only species that are considered to be mammals, etc. Okay, but as far as we can tell, and that's what this cartoon goes to, we are the only species that seeks meaning or purpose in our existence. Dogs, cats, horses, elephants, as far as we can tell, they don't go looking for this. Unless, of course, you believe this cartoon, and then when people are not looking, that cows talk. Okay, so that's why we wanted to use, this is one of the reasons why we wanted to select this topic for this core identity project. Okay, because it dovetails with what was announced at the outset of the course, where we would be making an effort to integrate elements that related to making a living, but then also elements in this course that touched upon to make a life. Okay, so to underscore, Nash and Murray, I think, state this quite well. A further reason why I wanted to select this topic for the purposes of this exercise. And as you can see there, a source that they cite, 2/3 of students report having great interest in spiritual matters. But of those who say they're interested in it, only about half reported that their faculty never engage in these types of discussions. All right, so I didn't want to be that guy. I believe these kind of numbers. I believe most, not all, but I believe most students, such as yourself, you are interested in elements that touch upon meaning and purpose in life. So we have an opportunity here with these two chapters in Nash and Murray to at least put this on the radar screen. So it's a part of this larger discussion that we've been having about identity. Now, to further elaborate on this, I wanted to just show a portion of a TED Talk of some years ago by Dan Buettner. And what he was talking about, since we'll just use an excerpt, They're referenced as a blue zones. Blue zones are places in the world, and that's what you can make out here on this graphic. Places in the world where disproportionately you have a high number of people who live to be 100 years old. All right, so, well, this is rare, so it's not commonplace. There's not a lot of blue zones in the world. But what Dan Buttner in his TED Talk is analyzing, what he's examining, is research that's been done. What accounts for this? Why is it well, as you can make out here on this graphic, that in Loma Linda in California, or Okinawa in Japan, or in Sardinia, Italy, Icaria, Greece, Nicoya in Costa Rica, what is it about these places that you have disproportionately people who live to be 100 years or older? So with that, just give me a moment because I have to move to the 10:15 mark. Okay? And we'll listen for a couple of minutes as he addresses now the point that I wanted to convey, why we're taking the time and why we're asking you, therefore, to invest time in this project for a core identity. All right, let's look ahead. All right, to the 10:51.
And then one day, boom, we retire. And typically that is meant retiring to the easy chair or going down to Arizona to play golf. In the Okinawan language, there's not even a word for retirement. Instead, there's one word that imbues your entire life, and that word is ikigai. And roughly translated, it means the reason for which you wake up in the morning. And for this 102-year-old karate master, his ikigai was carrying forth this martial art. For this 100-year-old fisherman, it was continuing to catch fish for his family 3 times a week. And this is a question. The National Institute on Aging actually gave us a questionnaire to give these centenarians. And one of the questions, they were very culturally astute people put the questionnaire. One of the questions was, what is your ikigai? They instantly knew why they woke up in the morning.
Okay. What we have here is what folks like Dan Buettner and others have been able to identify as a common denominator. Of all these blue zones from the previous slide, as you saw, the go-to answer that many people provided was, well, it was good genetics. These people are lucky. They just happen to be the genetic descendants of folks that, for whatever reason, they just live longer than others. Now, if you isolate it to places like Okinawa, as you saw there in Japan, yeah, and if you go to Italy, okay, yeah, that seems to make sense. See, because everyone in that area, they're the same genetic subgroup. Everybody's Japanese, or everyone was Italian. So this is why Loma Linda in California was such a game changer. See, because where they found the blue zone in Loma Linda, California, these people are not of the same genetic group. These people are of all different genetic backgrounds because the common denominator was their religion. Whoa. So it's not just genetics. So literally, here's the preponderance of the evidence. One, not the only, but one of the elements, be it greater or lesser truth, okay, but one of the elements that accounts for people living to be 100 years and older is not just good luck or good genes or a good diet. It's having a purpose in life. And as he noted here, the Japanese word for that, ikigai. So they've even identified the importance of this. So you know what you're about when you wake up in the morning. So that's why these try to provide several reasons why we're asking you, therefore, to engage in this core identity project. We wanted to at least put this on the radar screen as we go forward. Now, what I wanted to spend a little bit of time on is touching on some, not all, but touching on some of the points that our authors, Nash and Murray, pushed out in each of their chapters. Because of the whole coronavirus situation, we had to suspend the UF Fellows program. Okay, some of you'd begun working with Eric for some discussion, but then we had to suspend all of those. So I did want to at least take a few minutes here and touch on potentially some of the points that the authors were pushing forward to us. So let's take a look at one of your options, Chapter 2 for Existentialism and Postmodernism. Our authors, Nash and Murray, they are advocates of this potential position. As they note here, they believe that existentialism can bear fruit. It can be something that will provide students a way, if you will, to mitigate, minimize what they refer to as the ravages of ennui and burnout. Ennui, boredom, lack of purpose, apathy, okay, or burnout. They are advocates, therefore, of potentially how existentialism can benefit students as they pursue meaning and purpose in their lives. They set up the chapter with a story of one of their students named Amy, okay, whose whole name is not included to protect the innocent type of thing. Okay, so they know what we touched on earlier in the course, if you recall. It was referenced as the quarter life crisis. Okay? We live in a society, a time and a place where we are very fortunate. Okay, as noted here, the freedom to create her own life in her own way is good, to be sure. All right, so that's the strength. That's the good news. We have so many more choices now when it comes to our identity. Okay, but they go on to note potentially the weakness. It is also carries with it the terror of failure, isolation, and hopelessness. Okay? So they set up the story with Amy, and they'll use other student stories as well. Okay. But what we're asking you to do for this task is to engage with some of the existential questions that they provide there. Okay. And again, these are just some of the ones that they listed. And I'm not even asking that you use, what is it? What do we have here? 5. That you have to address all 5 of these. Okay. It's not as mechanical as that, but at least some. Engage with one, maybe 2. All right. So the whole point, therefore, is to get you to engage with the issues that are raised in this chapter and how the argument being pushed forward, how might a student find meaning and purpose? Okay. I found in reading Nash and Murray some time ago how it dovetailed with what it is that we had discussed about from given to chosen. We looked at a half a dozen events in Western civilization that contributed to this transition, where the emphasis was on community, where the emphasis then shifted to the individual. And here you see how this is synced. They too noted, if you will, how existentialism emerges from what we had discussed with the Renaissance as well as the Enlightenment that contributed, if you will, to this notion of greater freedom or individualism. Okay. In this chapter, they do, I think, a very good job of laying out the pros and cons of each position. So if you are reading it, you'll see they don't hide from what they consider to be potentially some of the cons. In fact, they open with that. They address it right from the outset. What the critics say of existentialism. Right? But then they go on to point out, if you will, the pros. So in particular, they'll reference on several occasions Viktor Frankl, okay, as an example of the pro, the plus of existentialism in providing meaning to life. So in this chapter, we have an opportunity to kind of drill down further on what was just only originally just touched upon when we began this discussion several weeks ago. This was the chart I used to summarize the arguments, the analytical framework to make sense of Anthony Kronman's book, The End of Education. So here we have an opportunity to see a little in more detail the difference between the modern and the postmodern outlook. Okay. So they provide a very useful analytical framework for this. So again, you don't need to be jotting this down. Okay, just pause the video, and there you've got it. I just tried to, if you will, in one place, collect some of the brief descriptions that they gave us, how within this worldview you have different understandings. All right, so there you see the contrast between the modern and the postmodern, though they led with the terms instead of the realists and the nominalists. So again, you're encouraged to take advantage of the analytical frameworks that the authors provide us. And here they do so in this chapter. Okay. Now let's do something similar for chapter number 3. Touch on some of the points that Nash and Murray provide us. So in this option, what struck me originally is when I was reading the subtitle to this. Why can't my faith be cool? So if you read this chapter, as they did in the previous one, they usually set up their discussion recounting a story from one of their students. So this subtitle comes from one of their students, a person who identifies on this side. All right, his position in in these 2 chapters, he's taken religion and spirituality, but he's scratching his head. Why is it that here at the university that my faith can't be cool? So they set that up with the story of that student there at the beginning of the chapter. Tellingly, the authors note they take the position that we might well be hardwired as human beings to crave, to seek spirituality. There's something about the human condition, okay, that we seem to be drawn, if you will, to trying to find meaning and purpose in life. All right, so, well, we're all in the same boat, according to the authors. We, all humans, we seem to be, therefore, hardwired to ask these kinds of questions. And again, as they did in the previous chapter, I think they do a good job of laying out kind of the pros and cons of each position. So in this chapter, for example, when they discuss the pros and cons of religion and spirituality, they don't shy away. They note that there have been bad things that have happened in the name of, say, religion, when religion has been used to divide us. See, but then they also point out that religion has also been used to unite us. So they point out, therefore, the pros and the cons of this position. Okay. And again, they offer analytical frameworks. So when they speak about folks who have taken this position, one example of the analytical framework, they identify, if you will, the mystics, the mainline believers, orthodox believers. All right, so take advantage of the analytical framework that the authors have made available here, okay, as you seek to put forward your argument. Okay. And again, what you're being asked to do is to engage with some, not all, but with some of the questions that the authors push forward. Okay. Is there a master plan to your life, do you think? Or is it all about blind chance? Okay. So that question, in a nutshell, can be encapsulated. Those of you who came to my office hour when we first were setting this up, that's the difference between the Jesus fish and the Darwin fish. See, one of the key elements in the Darwin fish, it's blind chance. That's what evolution is. All right. There is no driving purpose. There is no master plan. Okay. So that's an example where you could develop a bit further one or more of these questions that they provide. So again, you've got 2 choices. So for clarity, there's a lot more than just these 2 choices. In fact, their book has a lot more than just 3 chapters. Okay. If you are curious and interested, you could read more of the chapters that they provide. There's a lot of other possibilities. But for our purposes, we need to have this finished for Cinco de Mayo. All right, so it's an exercise in an argumentative persuasive essay. That's what we're trying to get you to develop. So in this moment in time, use these 2 chapters and make a choice. Make the case why you believe one provides a better path to find meaning and purpose over the other. Okay. And now we've reached the last part of this narrated PowerPoint. And this, I guess, this serves now as a send-off. to kind of tie a bow on this core identity project and for the course. So the theme that we'll explore in this last segment, I call "Don't Major in the Minors." Okay, I think Jim Ron explains it well. Learn how to separate the majors and the minors. A lot of people don't do well simply because they major in minor things. Okay, so I hope we have clarity on this. We're not talking about the major leagues and the minor leagues in baseball. And we're not even really talking about your major degree and if you're considering even getting a minor in something else. What is being addressed, therefore, in this last segment is, are we able to differentiate, to discern what are the more important things? Right? So what is of greater importance and what is of lesser importance? Right. In our class, UF-100, we've metaphorically, over the course of the semester, we've been juggling a lot of things. A course such as ours, we've been tasked to have to cover numerous elements. And it's understandable at different points, perhaps during the course of the semester, you might have felt that, okay, I'm not exactly sure. What are we doing here? How does this relate to that? Okay. Part of that was because of what it was that we were tasked to accomplish. So that's what I tried to kind of make tangible here in this graphic. Okay. Primarily, ours was a history course where we were looking, if you will, at elements of the process, how historians do history, and then looking at some elements of content. Okay. But we also identified identity, okay, another one of our larger metaphorical balls in the air, okay, and contrasting, therefore, the difference between given, chosen, and now here at the end, core identity elements. Okay. But all along the way, we had numerous other elements that we had to be juggling at once. Okay. But now, as we are bringing this to a close, what we're looking at primarily is core identity. So while you're here, and by here, what I'm referencing is the university, here at Boise State University specifically, or in the university in general, if you end up having to go somewhere else. So while you're here at college, the ask is to keep your eyes on the majors and not the minors. So there's more than just two majors. All right, but to bring this to a close, that's what I wanted to finish with. Keep your eyes now on two majors so we don't get lost in all the juggling. Okay. All right, so here, some of you might be familiar with this already. Okay. But let's go ahead and take a few moments. Okay. This, the monkey business illusion awareness test, okay, hopefully is pretty straightforward in that you're asked now, how many passes does the white team make? All right. So let's watch passes that the team in white t-shirts makes. Whoops. Sorry about that. Here we go.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion.
Okay, so The reason we wanted to use this is, well, the moral of the story. Okay? When we are told to look closely, and in this case, to count the number of passes that were made, many of us can therefore kind of be distracted, and we're missing what might also be going on around us. All right, so the moral of the story, while you're here at the university, don't miss the metaphorical gorilla. Don't get lost in the minors. Note the potential, the opportunity you've been provided to keep focused on one of the major elements, the opportunity you've been afforded. Okay? You may not buy into Matthew Sanders' assertion, thesis 100%, where he asserted the primary purpose of college is to become a learner. But the hope is that while you're here at the university, you'll be able to capitalize and take advantage of these opportunities to become more of a learner. So in his book, he provided us, if you will, here's an adapted chart, key elements that define a student in contrast to the learner. Okay? So don't miss the metaphorical gorilla, the opportunity that you might have in front of you to, when necessary, make the transition from student to learner. Okay? So that's one of the two elements that I wanted to draw your attention to that can represent, if you will, a major potential element while you're here at Boise State University. Okay? Now to the second one. To keep your eyes on the majors, all right, keep your eye out for the gorilla. Okay? The gorilla that we are using now as an example as a metaphor of learning while at the university. Our second one now is, what's your llama? Okay, now, this is my own story, and it goes back to when our oldest son, Kayet, went for the first time in his life to the LA County Fair. So he was a little guy, so I think he was like 3 or 4. And at that time, we were living in Southern California. And we decided, well, I had never been, nor my son, though my wife had been because she was from SoCal. So we decided, let's go to the LA County Fair. And the day we went, as it happened, it was just opening day. And when we went, we wanted to make a special effort well, of course, we were going to hit some of the rides, and we had to get some cotton candy. It was pretty cool. My son, Kayet, was able to ride a literal elephant, not a metaphorical one, a real elephant. He had an elephant ride, and we got the pictures to prove it. So it's a great day. You know, we're all enjoying ourselves. But because we were city slickers, we wanted to make sure that we went to the part of the fair where there was the livestock. Well, the day that we went, it was Llama Day. So literally, there were hundreds of llamas that had been brought by their owners, okay, for a competition. And as we're walking past the corrals, the stalls of all this llama, I'm just amazed. I'm amazed as I'm watching now these people preparing their llama. They got hair dryers out, you know, because they've shampooed the hair. They're drying their llama so they're going to look good. I mean, just the level of engagement and involvement with these animals left me, my chin dropped. As I finally walked to the end of one row of stalls, I looked across the way and there was the main arena. And in the main arena, that's where they were having the competition, where now the owners, they have numbers on themselves, and they actually march out. They come out with their llama, you know, so they're announced, and now, ladies and gentlemen, and then they parade around with their llama, and the judges are looking. Well, I'm not exactly sure what llama judges look for. Okay, but they're doing their judging thing. So I'm watching all of this, and I'm just amazed. One of my reactions was, only in America. Only in America do you have hundreds of llamas coming together and we're having this kind of competition. Some years ago, there was a film actually that had some fun, was a satire of this. Some of you might have come across it. The film was called Best in Show. And what they're talking about there is not llama. They're talking about folks who have this thing about their dogs and all these dog shows. Okay, so it's not just the llama thing that we're talking about in this film. They're seeing just how involved people become in their pets, the animals that they have. So while I was watching these folks with their llama, I have to admit I was having a laugh at their expense. So as I'm watching them kind of parade around and looking at all of this, I'm just saying to myself, these people, what is it with them? They got to get a life. So as I'm laughing at them, I finally caught myself in a self-awareness test. And I asked myself, what's my llama? I asked, well, what is it in my life that I disproportionately look to give it meaning and purpose? So I looked at myself in the mirror. Metaphorically speaking, what's my llama? Well, that's what we're asking you for this final project, the Core Identity Project. You have two choices, and we're asking you to reflect metaphorically, what's your llama? Okay. So again, this is the second of two examples. Don't get lost while here at the university in the lesser things, the minor things. Let's keep focused potentially on the greater or the major things. That's what Nash and Murray are asking us to accomplish. Now, tellingly, Sanders and the book by Nash and Murray, they don't agree on what is the primary purpose of college. Okay? They offer different truth claims. If you recall, we saw earlier Matthew Sanders, he makes the case that the primary purpose of college is to become a learner. Nash and Murray, meanwhile, argue, no, the primary purpose of college is for you to learn more about what will inform your life with meaning and purpose. All right? So they don't necessarily agree on the primary purpose of college, but both push forward, if you will, key elements, hopefully for us to keep with us as we go forward in our college career. For most of you now listening to this narrated PowerPoint, most of you are in your first year here at Boise State. This is your first year college experience. That's what the numbers tell us. It's close to 90%. So that's why we wanted to go with an assignment such as this. I didn't want to be that guy. I didn't want to be that college professor that Nash and Murray spoke about that for whatever reason didn't want to go there, didn't want to address, if you will, these major or greater issues that get us to ponder life's meaning and purpose. So keep your eyes on the majors. All right, while you're here at the university, be looking for that gorilla. The possibility that the gorilla walks by, that's our metaphor for learning. And then with this final project, what's your llama? You got two to choose from. Go ahead and make the case why you think one is preferable to the other. Because in the course of doing that, you're going to be doing now the work of historians. What historians do is multifaceted. And one of the key elements that we do is we argue. One of the main things that we do is we try to pursue truth, be it normative, subjective, objective, or complex. And in the case of complex truth, what's imperative is that we can discern the difference between greater and lesser truth. And what's that difference? Our working definition, the preponderance of the evidence, and your reasoning. So as we bring this course to a close, myself, our UF fellow Eric, our discussion group leader Emily, we want to wish you all farewell, that as you go forward in your college career and even beyond in life, that you will fare well. Take care.